awesome panelists in this session who will lend their professional perspectives. And each panelist will have between 10 to 15 minutes at the most, 15, to make their presentation around the theme for today. And when all the presentations have been made, we will then open up a general discussion and take questions. But first, just to let all our participants know that there is a question and answer box on your screen. Please feel free to pop in any questions in that box, and I will pick them up for the speakers. If the Q&A box doesn't work for you or you can't find it on your screen, please use the chat facility, which is also on your screen, for your questions and comments. We only ask that you kindly be polite and respectful, as we would want this to be a safe space for our panelists and participants to express themselves freely. So, without further ado, our first speaker this evening is Ms. E.A. Jonathan Ichave. She's a social justice advocate and social worker based in Lagos, Nigeria. She's the co-founder of CESOR Empowerment Foundation, and I hope I have pronounced that correctly. It is a disaster relief organization which supports internally displaced people and refugees. But before joining CESOR, EA worked with the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF Nigeria, as a private sector fundraising specialist, and with UNICEF Switzerland as well as a corporate alliances specialist. EA has worked in the NGO sector, including with the Center for Values in Leadership Nigeria. She's also worked in banking, in advertising, and in Christian ministry. She's an alumna of the George Washington University and also an economics graduate from the London School of Economics and Political Science. She's an advocate for women's and displaced persons' rights, and currently serves as the advisory board of Amnesty International Nigeria. Welcome, EA, and over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to unmute myself. And thank you, congratulations to the organizers, Prof. Okome and team, for just a wonderful past 2 days. I was able to join the session today briefly. Yesterday, work commitments did not permit me to join and really listen in. I just caught some of the summaries. But thank you very much for putting this together. I must say that this is absolutely groundbreaking in the sense that this is really one of the first times I'm seeing women across the continent getting together to really address these issues and really speak to these issues and share the narratives. And again, I really must applaud this webinar series and just getting people who are working on the ground to really weigh in on this. I had joined earlier where one of the panelists previously was talking about banditry, what it means and what it is. And basically, for the purposes of the work that we do at CESOR, we work and we've been supporting hundreds of families of displaced women with food supplies. We also provide micro funding for their businesses and trying to just help them rebuild their lives. And the truth of the matter is the effects of what the Nigerian government and the Nigerian press space has got us calling banditry are no different from the effects of terror. And we first started noticing the emergence of this term banditry when it became apparent that certain political players were not comfortable with these perpetrators of these crimes being called terrorists. So this term bandits just kind of emerged, and it seemed almost in a way romanticized to see, oh, these people are just deprived people who are trying to fight for some kind of rights. And that's how in some quarters it is still being pushed. We see very prominent spokesmen speaking and even justifying why these bandits, so to speak, should be given compensation for committing crimes, which in my view, against humanity in many ways. And I think it's very important as we look at as we think about gender sensitive policy solutions, to first and foremost confront what we're facing and call a spade, because you cannot prefer solutions if you do not diagnose properly. And you cannot prefer solutions if you're not willing to tell yourself the absolute truth. It's very easy to pin a label and say, oh, banditry, abductions, kidnappings. And it now becomes this daily word, and we're not really thinking through the implications of what really goes on when these so-called bandits come into communities with and wreak havoc and kidnap women, children, men. What happens when they take these children, women, and men? There's a story, I read that story, and it has traumatized me till today. When I think about it, I still shiver. One of the communities where these so-called bandits attacked and kidnapped, there was a story of a 2-year-old boy that was abducted along with the other people. There were other children, of course, as well. And they forced them to trek for however long. The child, eventually they were either rescued or ransomed. But the trauma of this experience for this 2-year-old was so much this boy died. That is murder as far as the rest of the civilized world is concerned. And this romanticization, and they abduct women and rape them. So we have murder going on, we have rape happening, child killings happening, and in some instances, possibly even child rape. And the order of the day and the government of the day has chosen to bandy all of those under banditry. So it's very important that we understand that our words and our language carry weight. And language is just not pinning a label on something for ease and convenience of being able to describe a body. It really should convey and depict what really happens when these people engage in banditry. So we need to recognize, one, the importance of speaking frankly so we can find real solutions. The second thing too is to again understand, I know we say it a lot, the gender sensitive policy solutions, we need to absolutely recognize, to be able to effect proper ones, the main people who suffer these things. I'm in Lagos. I've worked in Lagos with displaced people since 2014. Now, the history is that initially, it was very interesting, a very funny story of how we got to understand that people were coming down into Lagos. Even till today, when you tell people there are displaced people, people displaced as a result of insurgency, of banditry in Lagos, or terrorism in Lagos, they're surprised. I'm thinking, why are you surprised? If Syrians could run over to Germany or wherever, of course they'll run to where they consider to be slightly safer. Now, we started noticing in Lagos around 2013, 2012, funny enough, and that's something that is about us women. We notice little things that gender policies, policy makers men normally would not notice. So for example, I noticed I love to eat akara, right? And before late 2013, 2014, if I wanted akara and I didn't want to make it myself, right? I would drive out to look for someone buying akara. Making akara, and it used to be very difficult to find akara, especially in the area where I lived. I lived in Lekki, you know. And around 2014, I now began to notice that akara sellers were everywhere. Almost, they were popping up in every corner. I was like, what's going on? This was not the case. And we went and I began to ask questions. I was asking these women, oh, so where are you from? Oh, these people, they disturbed us. So we came from Adamawa. Oh, really? Oh, these people disturbed us. We came from Borno. Oh, really? We began to realize that as those attacks were happening up in the Northeast, they would jump on the nearest trailer available because they would attack the village. They would scatter, run, jump on the nearest trailer available. Wherever it's going, take me as far away from this violence as I can. And that's how come we now began to see this proliferation of women in these things. Of course, more women were moving around in hijabs, which was not so common. More women were selling all these cures or kaya mata or whatever. You'll be sitting in your car, someone come and knock on you. I have something for you that will get your man. So it was very interesting. And it's very important that as people who make policies, women also must be involved in that policy making. We must be at the table. If we're not at that table, we must find a way to bring our chairs and sit at that table and keep screaming until we're heard. So this is why this webinar is so important. So in terms of crafting gender-sensitive policy solutions, apart from telling the truth, we need to bring ourselves to the table. We need to make ourselves and our voices heard because we see things, we notice nuances that our male counterparts may not be so quick to notice or to understand. That's Kayan matter. That's actually aphrodisiacs that help sexual performance. They believe that anyway. It's not Kalamata, it's Kayan matter. Very popular. But they were selling them very confidently. They'll go and knock on your car door and tell you, I have something for you and your man. I'm wondering what I'm talking about. But we saw much more of that. So you keep, we have to keep talking and we have to keep preparing these solutions. We have to keep writing those papers. Now, in what we're doing, in the work that we're doing, it's very important for us to, as we talk about these solutions, these policy solutions, one definite one I would want to put forward is just the idea around putting women and children and their families. And when I talk about their families, even the effects of these things and how they affect women in the long run. So we do women's empowerment programs. And one of the things we've noticed is that we normally give the women funding for their micro businesses. It can range from 30,000 to 80,000 Naira. And they put it into their businesses and keep working. But what we've noticed is over the years, they've ended up bearing more and more of the burden. So they're already traumatized from having fled from home. They may have even been abducted and kept as sex slaves until they escaped or they were rescued and they left the place. They come here, so they're dealing with that trauma. But they have children and they have to take care of those children. So they end up doing a lot of work. But the men, their partners, the ones that are alive, we notice that they're alive, but they're not doing much. They're traumatized, they're taking drugs, taking drink to just try and cope with their own trauma of not being able to provide for their families. And they're not involved in family life. So these women end up now carrying double the burden. So they're doing the livelihood thing. And then also they're even in the whole process, trying to take care of the children, trying to discipline the children, trying to raise the children, because the men are really not up, they're not really involved. And one of the things we started trying to do recently is to say, we need a more holistic approach. We need more holistic solutions to rehabilitating people who have been affected by these terrors, by these abductions, by these kidnappings. We need a more holistic approach to just dealing with people who are displaced and people who have been displaced as a result of terror When bandits hit an area, they leave that, people leave that place. So for me, as far as I'm concerned, banditry equals terrorism because the effects are the same. It's the way we've the nomenclature. In every major city in Nigeria now, you see women and children begging. We need to also understand, and in fact, right now we're trying to commission a study into what are the factors driving this in certain parts of Lagos. We need to also understand that there is a racket where some of them are actually brought in. Some of these children are trafficked. Sometimes they even go and hire those children, and they're actually out there begging. So as we prefer those solutions, we need to also remember that the people in the midst of this are human. They're dealing on a daily basis with the various abuses and neglects they have suffered. And so one of the solutions we've been pushing is that as we seek to rehabilitate and help people deal with the long-term trauma, it's not just about livelihoods, it's not just about food, it's not even about shelter, but we must look at the entire person. So this woman has 5 children. Her husband, what's her husband doing? Because he also now adds to her stress and her trauma because he's traumatized. He's not doing anything. Children are neglected. Her children are growing up out of school. It now further exacerbates the problem because you're now breeding the next set of terrorists or terrorist bandits. I would like to call them that. You know, if you're not very careful. Already we're seeing the effects. So in Lagos traffic now, at some of the more highbrow, quote unquote, highbrow areas, you're there in your car and you're at the traffic light, they come, they try and wipe your window. If you're not willing to give them something, some of them actually start banging on your window and trying to attack you. These are young boys as young as 13, 14. So again, we're not looking at these solutions. We're not looking at these things from the perspective of these young people or these families that have been affected. The last thing I will say is the need to begin to very, very clearly, it's all about the person. You know, it's a lot of work, but the need to begin to enumerate maybe or put faces on and names to these numbers. Traditionally, Nigeria claims it has about 2.8 million people displaced. You and I know that is not the number. We know that those figures are much higher. But for some reason, it has paid this government to keep on putting out that narrative. Usually, they would only count those in the Northeast. They don't count those who have fled down to Lagos or fled down to the other major cities. In fact, when you raise the issue in the past, if you raised it with a NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency, or even or some of the states, they would even tell you that the people that fled are economic migrants from the north or the middle belt. That's what they'll be telling you. So we need to understand those things and begin to also push back with some of these terms that are used in the press, and maybe even begin to educate our journalists more and our writers more that, look, this banditry, you need to think it through. What's a bandit? You need to also look at these issues about who is displaced. What does displacement mean? If I'm forced to flee my home because of violence, I am displaced. I'm not an economic man. I didn't wake up and decide I'm leaving Chibok to come and sell things in Lagos. You know, it just doesn't make sense. So the need to put faces and names to those numbers is very important. And one of the other things that we call for is more resources put into actually begin to say, who is displaced? What's your name? Who are you? Where are you? Where did you come from? We try to do that in our organization with the women that we work with to get a sense of how many children do you have? What's your husband doing? Where are you displaced from? How long have you been in Lagos or what else, so on? And same thing in Benue or wherever else we go to reach out. So it's very important that we begin to maybe even take a database. This is something that we advocated with the presidency some years ago. They said they were working on it. We've not seen more information on that, but that whole issue of let's know who we have, let's know who is displaced, and let's know, because it's only when you know that you can begin to also think through those solutions and really think about the needs of the women and their families as they deal with the situation that we're seeing and deal with the trauma and the fallout. We have a lot of work to do. I'm going to stop here for the interest of time. Thank you very much for listening. And I'll leave it at that. But thank you so much for the time.
Thank you very much for that very insightful presentation, EA. And you said something very vital towards the end about database. And this is something that really worries me as a citizen of Nigeria. That is one of the massive gaps that we have in Nigeria, the lack of database. And it's not just due to the large population of Nigeria, but I believe also a lot of gaps in the structures, and in governance structures as well. Just before I move on to the next speaker, I would just like to get your perspective, or your thoughts on some things that I teased out from your presentation. And you mentioned much early in the presentation that, the act of girls or women being abducted, raped, and killed. And a lot of this has come up. I think the most common one is the Bring Back Our Girls campaign. But one very important question that I kept asking throughout the period of the Bring Back Our Girls campaign, and I don't know if that campaign has ended, because we don't hear, well, I don't hear much about it these days. So we don't know what the plight of the remaining girls are. But one of the key questions that I always asked at that time was, what happens, we were all jubilating when some of the girls came back, but what happens in the event that some of the girls don't want to come back? These were young girls, teenagers, at a very impressionable stage in their lives. We all know that stage in a woman's life, right? You're a teenager, a boy, you feel happy when a man talks to you, when he pinches your cheeks and, whatever. And so these girls might have been through those kind of things and enjoyed it. Maybe they had a better life in the camps of their abductors, better life than they did in their parents' homes. So what are the kind of policies, that we have in place for their not just their rehabilitation, but also to reintegrate them back into society? That's those who've come back, but also to think about what happens in the event that some don't want to come back. And I would like to leave that as a rhetorical question, just something for you to think about. And we'll come back to that at the end of the presentations when we take the questions and answers. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, who has inspired me in more ways than I think she knows herself. Professor Olufunmilayo Paramalam, MNI. She is the Director of Studies at the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies in Kuru, Nigeria's apex policy research and training institute. She's a professor of gender and development, a development consultant, and a women's rights activist. Professor Paramalam is a scholar of both national and international standard, who has won both literary and academic awards. Professor Funmi Paramalam is a former SSRC VPN fellow. She probably will give us clarity on that. And she's an alumna of the Harvard Kennedy School's Adaptive Leadership and Change Management. That was in 2019, and also a Senior Executive Fellows Program in January 2020. She obtained a BA Hons in French Portuguese from the University of Ile-Ife in 1984, and an MA in Law and Diplomacy from the University of Jos in 1995. In 2006, she obtained a PhD in Development Studies from the University of Leeds, United Kingdom. Join me in welcoming Professor Funmi Paramalam. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that very warm introduction. It's actually a really great pleasure to be here. And I'm especially excited to see my beloved Dr. Cyril Obi. It's such a delight to see you, sir. And also Prof. Prof, I love the egghead. Permit me to say. You were making fun of yourself earlier. That was just delightful. Anyway, thank you so much. And thank you for the first speaker. I really identify with virtually everything that she has said. With your kind permission, I would like to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Let me go to the slideshow and all right, good. So hopefully to talk about gender sensitive policy solutions. I didn't have the privilege of being at yesterday's session, but I did listen into the earlier session, and so much that was said resonates with what I have to say today. Gender sensitive policy solutions to me is actually something that we really need to end this conversation with in a very, very powerful manner. Let me set this context with what the late Kofi Annan said a few years ago in his landmark study on ending violence against women and girls. And he made this powerful assertion that gender-based violence is the most severe and pervasive human rights violation on the planet, but it's not unchanging or inevitable, but can be radically reduced through the mobilization of political will and the right resources. Now, one of the things that that study highlights is that gender-based violence covers every form of violence you can possibly imagine or speak about. And it's about violence and conflict across time, space, culture, socioeconomic status. And that incorporates things like insurgency, terrorism, banditry, kidnapping, and what have you. So we're really talking about the whole gamut, the whole range of these issues that we've been discussing since yesterday. So I would like to really address this issue from three perspectives. From the perspective of a scholar in gender, the perspective of a gender activist working in gender-based violence in specific terms, and also as a perspective as a Nigerian woman who knows precisely through my family history and my own work what it means to experience different types of violence. I'm speaking from that context, and I would like to address the issue of the policy response, the policy framework as it exists, its lapses, and what we need to strengthen it going forward. So what policy instruments exist for us in Nigeria that we can leverage, that we can rely on, or that need strengthening? And at the international level, obviously, we all know about the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 and subsequently 1820. And these call for a gender perspective, the mainstreaming of women and girls and boys and men's experiences, perspectives in the whole process of policy design and policy delivery. So it's not just about how does the policy even get formulated in the first place, but how is it delivered? Who is it delivered to? Who benefits from the policy? And are these outlined categorically and specifically within the policy instruments? Now, looking at the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, we do have a Magna Carta that acknowledges the gender-specific character of all forms of violence in whatever manifestation. In other words, every security issue is a gender issue, and it highlights the various responses that both governments and individual duty bearers must elaborate in order to respond. And then we have the national and subnational level instruments from which Nigeria has derived a lot of its policy responses. So for instance, and I was actively involved in the setting up of the National Action Plan in 2013, was involved in that with the Ministry of Women Affairs. And those plans, which were also called for at the level of the international, were to give us context-specific approaches, acknowledging that the manifestations of insurgency, terrorism, banditry, or whatever, trafficking, they may be different from place to place, even within a given country context. And we've seen that in our own work. I lead an NGO called Queens, and in our own work, we have seen that from state to state, the dimensions and manifestations of these issues that we are talking about, these security issues, are quite different. And very often, not only do they require a gender-specific response, but a context, location-specific response. So the National Action Plans. And then in 2015, we had the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act. And kudos to all the women on this platform and elsewhere who were a big part of getting that landmark legislation passed. It has been a mighty, I think, advancement, a watershed for us in some respects. And that was to finally put some legal teeth to the issues that we had been crying about. And then there are sectoral policies in education, in gender. 2 years ago, I was involved in setting up the Gender in Health policy, which called for a specific approach to responding to women's needs, women who have been victims of various forms of violence, whether in conflict times or peace times, responding specifically to women and boys, women and men, boys and girls' needs in the health sector. And then there are security agency policies. The police now have a gender policy. The military, various military formations have their own gender policies. All these subnational instruments exist, but the question is, are they working? Are they really working for us? And if they are not, why aren't they working? And how can we get them to work? And I think that's exactly why we're here for this particular session. So from these instruments, and there are a host of others, but these are just general ones that I care to mention. Let me just highlight the critical issues as I see them in looking at how and why we need to respond. First and foremost, these policy instruments highlight the fact that conflict and violence are highly gendered experiences. And a lot that has been said before this particular session by previous speakers, the previous speaker and in other sessions, highlight that fact that even when it comes to kidnapping, there is a way, or banditry, there is a way females experience it. We have, and males experience it differently. For example, boys are often co-opted as soldiers. They lose their childhood as boy soldiers. They're conscripted into Boko Haram and other things like that. And then you have girls having their education truncated and becoming comfort wives to insurgents and bandits. So gendered experiences in peace and conflict times. But then for females, violence is real in both conflict and peace times. And that's something that very often we overlook. People think of insecurity, banditry, terrorism only in terms of what happens to people in public spaces. But for women and girls, violence is often a very private experience happening in places, in private spaces as well as in public spaces. And that means that policy response must reach beyond the public sphere into the private sphere. The third issue, critical issue for our consideration, is that violence against women and girls often takes place in spaces where they should be safest. And in a research that we did in 2014, we found this to be overwhelmingly true, that 82.3% of violent experiences that women and girls had were at home with authority figures, in schools where they should be protected, in hospitals, or in places of worship. And these are places where you would expect ordinarily they should be safe spaces for people. But a great deal, overridingly, issues of violence took place in these spaces. The fourth critical issue is that gender-based violence response is undermined by diverse forms of societal and institutional resistance. So while we do have some powerful pieces of legislation and policy instruments in place, institutional resistance, societal resistance is very, very rife, and it plays out. For example, one good example I could give off the top of my head is when we caught, we took a man to the police station here in Jos who had gouged out the one eye of his wife with a broken bottle. And when we got to the police station, when our staff got to the police station, the police were like, oh boy, you're back again. And they were giving him a handshake. And that shows you that this man had been a recurrent offender, but the police didn't see it as a big deal. So there's that pushback, there's that resistance from institutions that should otherwise be the duty bearers for protecting and promoting safety and human rights for women and girls. So what gender sensitive policy solutions do we need in addition to what we have that can get the existing frameworks to really work for us? And that's what I want to address myself to quickly. Let me highlight the 5 pillars of the Nigeria's current National Action Plan on addressing all forms of insecurity. And those 5 pillars are very critical, beginning with prevention. That look, one of the reasons why we are where we are is because we have not paid attention to developing a culture of peace through gender responsive legislation. So going to the very foundation of our legal system, we haven't actually built a culture that promotes peace. And then participation. And the last speaker said it beautifully well, that unless women are at the table, we will be on the menu, basically. And that's what has happened. women being absent from the table of peace discussions, conflict resolution, conflict transformation means that we are often the ones that end up carrying the short end of the stick when it comes to security policy, defense policy, what have you. So there needs to be more female participation in peace building and decision making at all levels across the board in both the private and the public sector. Because it is, and I would just want to say that it's not just having the numbers of women, but having the kind of women who are sensitized, conscientized enough to know how and when to bring about change. Then protection. How do we protect our girls? How do we protect women wherever they may find themselves? How do we ensure that women feel safe wherever they are? Somebody talked about terrorism, banditry and terrorism being the same thing. But terrorism for women could be going home at night to face an abusive husband. Terrorism for a young girl could be going to school where she knows that her principal has been making sexual advances. Or a woman who is going to work, earning her daily bread and being confronted by a boss who fails to promote her or give her access to other things that her male colleagues are getting simply because she refuses to give him sexual favors. That is also a form of terrorism. And we often ignore those forms. So protection. And then promotion, actively, intentionally, deliberately, in all spheres, in all sectors of society, promoting women's rights. And then prosecution. We have currently a culture of impunity across the board, across Nigeria. And unless we have special courts and gender-aware training for law enforcement agents, that is going to continue. Because when you get into the criminal justice system, and I'll speak a little bit more about that in a while, you find that there is this sense of, and so what? Why are you guys making such a fuss? I have so many case studies of legal cases that I have brought or that my organization has brought that I've experienced pushback from judges, from police, from lawyers, and what have you. So prosecution and ending the culture of impunity is vital. Now, before I go on, I feel that it's important that in looking at the policies, we must understand what the policies need to address. And very often, more often than not, I find that policies like the violence against the VAP Act, and policies like the National Action Plan, they address the visible types of violence, the direct forms of violence, battery, kidnapping, sexual violence and all of that. But the invisible forms of violence that are the substructure of these types of violence, cultural violence, which is from a worldview, a patriarchal worldview that dehumanizes and de-emphasizes female value. And then the structural forms of violence in terms of institutions that fail to work for women because they have an archaeology or an architecture of male favoritism. Those types of violence we hardly remember. As I was saying in a seminar just a few days ago, people don't realize that denying a girl education is also a form of gender-based violence. And so the highlights from this are that, number one, at the structural level, we need to address the trivialization of gender issues, the outright denial of their existence, and that happens virtually every day. We need to also address the culture of silence, stigma, and blaming the victim. And so let me give you just an example that happened on this platform. I don't know whether you noticed, but somebody had said during the last session that women are their own problem because they don't vote for each other. and I quickly sent a rejoinder. I said, actually, that's inaccurate because a lot of women who are in elective posts today were voted in by women. And women also have the freedom not to vote for a woman if they so decide not to. And men have the freedom to vote for women if they so decide. That's gender equality. But the issue that I want to highlight is this culture of always blaming women for their own situation. And I feel as if we need to give that lie the lie and say it for what it really is. And then direct forms of violence, we often minimize the guilt of the perpetrator and expect the victim to extend a culture of mercy to the perpetrator. And therefore we tell the victim, get on with it, it's happened, And so this culture of impunity is one thing that I really want to highlight. So
looks like Professor Paramalam has frozen on her screen, or is it me? Ah, there
Sorry,
we are.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, excellent. Sorry, maybe my
Your internet dipped a bit.
yeah, but here it is. Here I am again, just quickly to say that number one, a human security approach, prioritizing the value of every Nigerian life across intersecting identities. And I'm talking about the fact that gender often intersects with income, with religious identity, with disability and what have you. So we need a holistic human security approach. Second, a whole of government approach. And for me, this is so key. What do I mean by a whole of government approach? The fact that we need across the various MDAs to have a multi-stakeholder platform that deals with the issues of insecurity holistically, and that we advance a one-stop shop where complaints and grievances can be addressed and people don't have to run from pillar to post expressing their pain and their suffering. Another one is the whole of society approach. Whole of society approach means that we challenge gender discriminatory narratives that are rooted in tradition, in culture, in religion. We need to begin to change those narratives unless we address the underlying narratives. And I have a wonderful example of this. In a few years ago, we did a project with United Nations Women. And in that project, what we did was that we sensitized grassroots women to get involved in politics, get involved in leadership. And the program was so well implemented that traditional rulers in 2 local governments in Plateau State began to involve women in their traditional councils to great effect. And these men became gender champions to other traditional rulers. So, but they had to begin to challenge those notions about gender in order to do so. Secondly, we need to leverage critical gatekeepers, such as traditional rulers, religious leaders, political leaders. My husband is a religious leader and is currently mobilizing religious leaders in the Christian community to support the Gender Equal Opportunities Bill. That's the kind of thing we need to begin to do, to get these stakeholders who seek relevance to exhibit their relevance in the area of supporting women and gender-based causes. The next one is institutional support and strengthening. Our institutions are weak. And so even when we have laws, and we do need legislative reform, but in addition to those laws, we need to have an accountability system that makes these laws have compliance power. So electoral system reform, we need to support the Gender Equality Opportunities Bill Act to give legal teeth to the Nigerian gender policy, which calls for 35% affirmative action. And that means I am saying that for women's organizations, civil society organizations need to set up a scorecard that tells these institutions, this is how you are performing when it comes to gender and security. And then, like somebody said earlier, the database. We need to have gender disaggregated data that tells specifically how women and girls and boys and men are being impacted by insecurity and where. And then specialized training for duty bearers. I mentioned this earlier, that security agents, law enforcement, teachers, health personnel, people who have responsibility need to undergo specialized training in their various curricula at the various levels of training, so that gender rights education is inbuilt into the way they think and into the way they practice. So a community of practice. Yeah. Mandatory and accessible organizational workplace gender policies. How many organizations have sexual harassment policies? How many have gender policies that talk about how people need to be able to respond to insecurity in the workspace? And I think the Ministry of Labor and Productivity has a major role to play here. So in conclusion, and I'm sorry for the rush, I'm just being conscious of my time.
Yeah, that's fine.
In conclusion, yes, in conclusion, I'd like to say that to get things done through effective policy action, we all need to agree on the gendered nature, the gendered dimensions and implications of conflict and violence, and that it needs to be addressed equitably for all without prejudice. Thank you very much for listening. I look forward to your questions and contributions.
Thank you very much, Professor Funmi Paramalam. Another insightful presentation there, and I'm sure most of you will agree, if not all of you will agree, that there was nothing new. I think a lot that was in that presentation are things that we've known for years and years, and things that we've been fighting for years and years. But again, the challenges are still there. the hurdles are still there, and we're just looking for solutions on how to overcome them. Thank you very much for that presentation. I think one of our speakers, Betty Abba, is not here either. I've not seen her on screen, so she's probably experiencing internet connection problems as well. So I will go on to...
Unless she's gone off. Sorry. I thought I saw her
okay.
earlier.
Okay,
but...
she says I can hear her voice, but I can't see her on
in the audience, so can you let her in? LSA.
Okay, while we're waiting for her to be let in as a panelist, we will take the next presentation and then come back to Betty Abba. So our next speaker is Dr. Fatima Lawson, who is a community member, a school administrator, and adjunct professor. And she's had a long, winding journey to education, she says. I don't know, she might want to tell us a bit about that if we find the time. She was born and raised in northern Nigeria, and so she's my sister, Barka Dezua, in a community where Western education was often discouraged. We all know that, about northern Nigeria in particular, how very slow northern Nigeria has been in catching up with girl child education, particularly for young women and girls. So, however, driven by her curiosity, she says, and thirst for knowledge, she first completed undergraduate and graduate degrees at the University of Ife in Nigeria, and then continued to complete another master's and even a PhD from the United States, University of Minnesota in the United States. Now, how awesome is that for someone who's coming from such a background that she has come to have achieved educational qualifications up to the level of a PhD. You would agree with me that there's a lot of history behind that. She's currently the committee chair for the state's Elementary Principals Association Legislative Committee, and she draws on her lived experience, bringing her international perspectives from around the world into the classroom, administration, and other educational settings, and finding ways to connect with her students, staff, and community members, both here and abroad. I cannot wait to hear how she draws the strings of her lived experiences into the work that she does. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Fatima Lawson. Over to you.
Thank you very much, my sister. And thanks to my predecessors in this business of talking about these gender sensitive issues. It's very dear to my heart. When I was preparing for this, I was thinking, okay, should I make a very scholarly presentation and talk about the data and so many things? And I said, well, with people like Fumilayo, Paramalans, and others before me on this panel, I'm sure they'll cover that base. And I'm glad that they did. I'm very, very excited, to contribute my own little quota to the discussion. And to be honest with you, I am speaking more from my heart than from anything else. I have a nephew now in Kano, which is my hometown, who is actually head of security in Kumbozo. And I have had some wonderful conversations with him. And I don't want to divulge so much because, of course, security and people are all listening. This is a worldwide, I believe, forum. But some of the things that he said touched me to the core because I lost my sister November 20th. She was actually killed by bandits. It's like, killing that golden egg in the community. She was a nurse midwife, did so much for the community. And to end her life like that was really, to me, abhorrent. And I have felt, the pinch of it and guilt and so many things. The first thing that came out of so many people's mouths, including my family, is that, if she were really still with her husband, I mean, she was estranged, she was still married, but not with her husband at that time, this would not have happened to her. So how can you define a woman's safety, security, in terms of being somebody else's wife? Well, to go back to this so that I don't, deviate so much from the norm, and I'm sensitive of the time, I want to give in as much as I can. What gender sensitive policy actions, are being designed now and implemented to address the various forms of insecurity within Nigeria? That's one of the questions that we were asked. I kind of reflected on all the three, and if I have time, I'll touch on them. But just to bring things back in perspective, the whole idea of gender sensitivity in policy making was born, if you recall, from the need for a new approach to policy making that takes into account both women and men's situation and concerns. So gender mainstreaming and policy statements first came up, as a concept at the 1985, if I'm not mistaken, United Nations Third World Conference on Women, which happened in Nairobi. It was then introduced as a strategy in international gender equality policy, by the Beijing Platform for Action that was adopted also in 1995, which was, I believe, the fourth UN World Conference on Women, which was also in Beijing. So the national gender policy has been developed with comprehensive insights into the following, which includes Nigeria, by the way: empowerment of women, rights and access to justice, leadership and accountable governance, gender roles and relationships, and of course, economic opportunities for women. My predecessors in this have talked and touched upon some of that. So we have to look at some of these things and how they play out in our Nigeria today, especially the northern part of Nigeria. Community should take into account every opportunity to promote gender equality and facilitate mobilization of women. When I heard my sister speaking earlier, and some of the things that have been done in Lagos, like the CESO, I'm like, wow, I hope we had an equivalent, especially in Kenya. And Kenya stands as a very, very important northern hub of be it religion, commerce, or even, if you like, human rights issues. And yesterday, Ms. Aisha was talking about Wasila's situation. So these things are happening around us, and nobody seems to be saying much about it. I know that the federal government, when they talk about women's issues, when they talk about rights and responsibilities, for the most part, they kind of cleverly carve out the North, especially Kanu. There's just something about Kanu. Maybe it's the sensitivity, the desire not to, just touch that elephant in the room. I don't know. So using sex and or gender disaggregated data is going to help, especially on kidnapping and abduction. When kidnapping started and all these things, and with the Boko Haram insurgency, we were looking at the northeastern part, not the northwestern, north central. But these things are happening. I know that I belong to another group, and we're talking, and the governor said Kano is really the safest in the north with regards to banditry, insurgency, and other, mayhems that are happening across the northern belt. And I cringed because some of these things are not reported. They are kind of undocumented, or they're complacent because the law, agencies are definitely turning the other cheek, especially the perpetrators are men. And of course, Professor Fumilayo did talk about some of that with the examples that she gave. We ourselves should ask and look at some of the very simple things with regards to gender equality that will put women in the forefront, such as policies that will analyze patterns of growth, employment, generations, and other things to really further emphasize and solidify the role of women, the public goods, even in food production, distribution and consumption, population dynamics, and women's bodily integrity. What do I mean by that? We talk about rape. We talk about physical abuse on women, like the man that walked into the police station and everybody was almost like hailing him for gouging the eye of his wife. How can such a thing happen in a civilized country like Nigeria? So we have to be very, very sensitive to these issues and really, really advocate, not because we're from South and this is happening in North, and I'm not accusing anybody, but I have seen that there are just so many disparities with the way that we are addressing, these gender equality issues, depending on where we come from in Nigeria. So as you know, when we protect the well-being of women, definitely we are protecting the well-being of humanity, especially posterity, because if women are not protected, they are the bearers, they are the child bearers and nurturers. And what do you think is going to happen to us in the long run? social protection programs that mainstream the inclusion of women require policymakers, of course, to assess the underlying causes of exclusion. Why are women excluded in this? And take deliberate measures to address that gender-specific risks and vulnerability. For example, states must pay particular attention to eligibility criteria and targeting methods that are used to ensure that some policies exclude or disadvantage women. We're talking about law enforcement. Actually, when I was talking to my nephew, it's like, okay, how many women law enforcement or police officers do you have? Had to count and could not actually tell me up to 5 in a department that has at least 3 to 450. So why is it so? There are some policies that really exclude the participation of women, and we should look at these things. There's also the case in the North, that address the circumstances of women who had been dismissed from various forms of employment based on being pregnant. I know when I was in school at FGGC, because already as an example, so many girls had to give up their education because, unfortunately, they were pregnant or they were withdrawn to get married, and I was one of those. But that's a story for another day. So we have to understand that policies around access and opportunities. We talk about access and opportunities for minorities here in the United States. Why can't we talk about those access and opportunities for Nigerians? We have a lot of NGOs. How many people have written us to say, hey, we want this, we want that, you get this money from you and you get that. Where do those things go, or those resources go? Why are women not accessing them? I am speaking especially for the case of northern Nigeria. So these policies around those access should be, to me, revised. Women in many places don't have the same access, of course. And this is becoming generational. If a mom doesn't have access, tell me whether the daughter will have access. Even when you look at technology, all these things are more accessible to men than they are to women. Earlier, we're talking about voting. Yeah, yesterday I also listened to that, and I kind of reacted a little bit when they said, oh, we women are not supporting women. But you have to understand the dynamics. In the household where a man has 4 wives, if he is voting one party, the wives also have to vote that party. So it's not like women do not want to support other women, but they do not have the capacity to do that. So where are we? Those of us who think we do have the capacity to do that. How are we supporting those women? By, not really getting them in trouble, but making sure that they have access and opportunities to these amazing resources that we have in the country. So gender equality definitely means equal visibility, empowerment, responsibility, and participation of both sexes. We're saying gender equality, right? In all spheres of public and private life. A lot of our opportunities seem to be, we rely so much on the government in our sphere of influence, I think, in Nigeria especially. So what are those private? I talked about the NGOs and all the money that they're working around the world. What are they doing? How are they playing in partnership with the government, since we rely so much on them? How are they having access to these women so that they can really protect their rights as well? We are really thinking about those things. And when you look at it, a lot of our researchers have found out that these are the issues that are that are really putting women down. But what are they doing to make sure that they are supporting? We also have to have what they call stakeholder engagement and analysis that are conducted in an inclusive and gender responsive manner, so that the rights of women and men somehow, and the knowledge, the needs, and the roles and responsibilities and interests are very much duly addressed. A strategy and time-bound action plan, some of it my colleague has talked about earlier, on gender equality and equal citizenship should be developed to support the effective implementation of a new policy and guide specific efforts and actions to promote gender equality. And of course, I talk about empowerment all the time. Sometimes, I cringe when I talk about empowerment, because empowerment means you're waiting for somebody to give you that power and permission to act. But in this case, we're waiting for those opportunities and accesses that women need in order for them to definitely show their influence. We want them, at the table, not on the menu, as has been said earlier. And sometimes we want them, they may be at the table, but silent and not able to eat or partake of whatever is on the menu. So we have to find ways that we can definitely make that, happen. So these are some of the things I think that will help to drive the need for us to promote gender equality. There need to be also for us to identify, addressing gender-based violence that we're experiencing. In the North, when you read the papers, because I also give reports in another forum that I am on some of the things that are happening in Kano, because they divided us by states, and then you talk about the hot issues or the hot topics in the country. And to be honest with you, it's replete, if you can get down to reading the real news, with violence against women, domestic violence, murders that are not that go undetected. And then, when I thought I was going to talk about banditry and all that, and one of the suggestions I was going to give actually is, use of technology to combat these acts of violence in the country. I know banditry has been of course, named. Banditry is terrorism, as somebody has said. And what have we done? What are we doing? I know that sometimes people say, "Oh, you guys are over there abroad. You don't know what is going on. Why can't you come here and help?" Yeah, we have groups like Women Manifesto, I believe, that are also talking about all this and are partnering with non-governmental agencies and other gender partnerships to really address this issue. The strategy and action plan that we're talking about, should be linked to local municipalities and establish frameworks to monitor and report on progress. Yeah, we may put some things in place, but how are we monitoring progress? I was looking at some data, and to be honest with you, sometimes it depends on who you're talking to. The data is forever changing, and it should be something that is at least reliable, something that is generalizable to some extent. But we are not having that. People have talked about that, the lack of adequate data. But when we have the data, how are we using the data? What are we doing to make sure that we are looking at the way that things are changing based on the policies that we've put in place? Nigeria is a very rich country in human resources as well as natural. But what are we doing to leverage those two in order for every single citizen, women, girls, and men, or young boys, to make sure that they have access, they have opportunity, and they are definitely using it to improve their life? Government should also target measures to tackle specific challenges faced by women. We have all these kinds of abuses. We have a lot of unwanted pregnancies. And, from the North, we definitely do not, abortion is not legal. I don't think it's legal anywhere in Nigeria either. And when these pregnancies happen, the girls, have these babies, and then they give them up for sadaka. They will go to a 15-year-old girl who has the misfortune of getting pregnant, could be given, as alms to a 50-year-old man, or let's say 60-year-old man who maybe has so many kids, some of them much, older than her, to say, okay, this is what, because she's a bazawara. She is like, used, if you will. These things have to be addressed. It's not only the women's right to vote that is important. We have to look at how women are being abused, how the policies that are put in place are really, really putting them at a huge, huge disadvantage to progress and to get to where they need to be. Some of these women are amazingly smart and brilliant. And if given the chance, they will do unheard of things for this world. So gender analysis will help policymakers to bring to light the potential impacts that mainstream responses to some of these disadvantages that are happening to women, on not only the economic situation, because we look at that more than anything else, but we have to look at the social strata and how that one plays into where we put women today. It can also help us to identify and remove potential, gender biases and policies, regulations, and things that even the way the government budgets, it's very, very gender-based. When you see programs that will benefit men, you see so much money, being appropriated to. Whereas the ones that will benefit women are almost non-existent. Had we not had these NGOs, again, I go to them, we definitely would not know where we'd be. Did I hear somebody giving me some time?
Yeah, that was just me prompting you now.
Okay, how many minutes do I have? Because I thought I had
No, you've actually overrun. I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh. So anyway,
I know time goes so quickly, you know, when you're discussing very important issues. And I'm just very conscious, you know, that
okay,
we don't have
sure.
that
I
much
will
time
respect.
left.
Okay, I'll respect the time. I thought I had a little bit more time, but that's okay. And hopefully I'll come back to some of the points during the discussion time.
Thank you
Thank you
very
for
much,
giving me the
Dr.
chance to
Pastor
speak.
Lawson.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Being very conscious of how much time we have left, I'm going to go straight to our next speaker, who is Betty Abba, and she's a women and children's rights advocate and founder of the child's right nonprofit called the Center for Children's Health, Education, Orientation, and Protection, See Hope. Betty practiced originally as a journalist and worked with Newswatch and Tell magazines in Nigeria and the Rocky Mountain News in the United States. She holds a BA in English and Literary Studies from the University of Calabar and an MA in Literature and English from the University of Lagos, where she's also worked. The Environmental Rights Action, Friends of the Earth in Nigeria on environmental justice campaigns. These are places where she's worked before starting See Hope in 2013. She's also authored 6 books, including poetry books, Go Tell Our King, and Sound of Broken Chains, and Mother of Multitudes, which is a biography. Very big welcome to you, Betty Abba, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? I hope it's audible enough. Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, kindly allow me to put up my video so that my internet can work very well from here. Okay, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be on this panel, this very timely panel, and to be able to speak to the issue of, excuse me, gender sensitive policy solutions. And I'm going to draw some of my thoughts from the experiences I've had over the years working with displaced women and children. My sister EA touched a lot on the realities on ground now, the invisibility of displaced families. When you talk, and the fact that so many people are surprised that we have a lot of displaced persons in Lagos. In fact, we have displaced persons from across the north coming into Lagos in their hundreds every single day, and then they just disappear into the population. And then the issues about the difficulties they face, adapting, even basically existing, does not make it to, those issues do not make it to the news. And we're really happy for someone like EA that's addressing them, responding to some of those issues. Over my organization work with young persons, basically in informal communities, in marginalized communities. And over time, we've had to extend our work to displaced persons in the North, especially the North Central, especially young persons. And in recent times, a woman. So recently, one of the women I work with, one of the orphanages we work with about 4 orphanages across the North Central, Benue, Plateau, and Kaduna. One of the, so the orphanage in Kaduna got in touch with me, the coordinator of the orphanage, whose mother was taking care of displaced children from across southern Kaduna and other parts of the North Central. And then she was killed while traveling to Benue a few years ago. So she basically took over. And then she called me and said, this morning, a set of widows came to my place wailing, they were crying that there was nothing at home for them to eat or to be able to offer their children. There were mostly children, women who had been displaced by insurgency, the herdsmen crisis in southern Kaduna in particular. And so I told her, oh, let's see what we'll be able to do. But sometimes we're just overwhelmed with the demands from these orphanages and communities where you have a lot of displaced persons. And most of the time is the women that are striving to be able to survive with their children. Some of their men, their husbands are killed, or some just run away because of the entire weight of problem they have to face. And from time to time, I keep talking about the fact that you have more people outside of the former IDP camps that have been created because of insurgency, because of banditry across northern Nigeria. You actually have more persons staying with families, trying to run away to the nearest safe persons in Abuja and other parts of the country. But then generally they're just invisible. Nobody really addresses their issues, and they just try to find a way to be able to survive, to be able to just merge with the rest of society. And it's something that, and then they carry the wounds and the scars over with them as they move along in life. And nobody really attends to them, no form of psychosocial support. But then I'm talking generally about the women. But then I thought I should just bring in this general thought. They need to address the invisibility of displaced persons from across the north. The need for social protection, the need for government action, not just on paper, that to be able to even, someone referred to data, to have a data on these people, to be able to even address their basic problems. Then I would like to touch also on the issue of menstrual hygiene. When you talk about displaced women, when we talk about the need for gender sensitive policies, you know, as a patriarchal society, most of the people we have at the helms of affairs, at the policy making table are usually men. Even the coordinators of the camps, the IDP camps, are usually men. And so men generally do not remember that women will need pads, that women will need menstrual hygiene products, or that women will need some kind of privacy, because it's just not in their nature. It just doesn't occur to them. And it's something that we really have to put at the front burner to keep reminding policymakers, to keep ensuring that we bring in these sensitive policy angles. When you talk about the need, even in the IDP camps, in the establishment of sanitation facilities, the ones that are gender sensitive, and the need, like I said before, to provide menstrual hygiene products to women. When I talk mostly, in the last few years, we've talked about, we've had this campaign on period poverty. And then when I talk, even with women activists, they feel very squeamish about it. I say, oh, period, and all of that. You know, not so many people are talking about it. And it doesn't mean that it's not a major problem. The fact that people think when we talk about it, it sounds dirty and odd, does not make it less of a problem. When you talk about, in view of the economic challenges that Nigeria is in now, the average woman is finding it hard to grapple with managing their monthly menstrual period, the woman within the reproductive age bracket. And then when you talk about people who are completely disempowered economically, who are displaced, how do these women cope? It's something that we really have to keep putting at the front burner until it is addressed. Because the fact that these women are displaced does not mean their period cease to come when they are within the reproductive age bracket. What is being done to address it? Why would you always have to perennially leave people to be at their own, to be left on their own? What is the responsibility of government to people who are displaced? What is the responsibility of government to their gender specific problems? What is the responsibility of government to their reproductive health issues? These are things we have to really bring to the burner, like I said. And it's something also that we even have to make sure that it becomes a mainstream campaign within the women's rights campaign, the women's rights sphere in Nigeria. Menstrual hygiene, period poverty is a major talk across the globe. And one of the countries where it's hardly talked about is Nigeria. And I wonder why this is so. If Nigeria now occupies the position of the poorest country on earth, if Nigeria's economy is going through an unprecedented turbulence, then you can expect that period poverty will be a major issue. But you don't find women shouting in the streets about these issues. It doesn't mean it's not a problem. It's because there's a major problem with a period taboo. There's a major problem about the silence around period, around menstruation in general. And so if there's anything for me that comes out as a fallout, as a result of this program, is that we begin to talk more about the challenges with period poverty, with regards to people who are displaced, with regards to vulnerable women in Nigeria, and the need for a solution to this problem. And so I don't have much to say. I think much has been said, a lot of thought has gone on, a lot of knowledge in the house, but I just want to chip in this idea that we should not forget, in all our campaigns, in all our proposals, they need to put menstrual hygiene, they need to put period poverty as a major issue that should be in the front burner, no matter how squeamish you feel about it, no matter, even if you feel that it's not a personal problem to you. I was speaking on Women's FM the other time, and I said, I had to really open up. I had a fibroid surgery about 6 months ago. And before then, the last few years before the surgery, I had a major problem with my monthly period. It was extremely heavy. And then I had to, at a point before the surgery, I had to buy the pad costing like a major sanitary pad, always something, ultra, so for 5,000 naira. I had to buy that every single month. And I kept wondering, how many people will be able to afford this? In some of our communities, some of the teachers collect salary of 5,000 naira. So by the time you use 5,000 to buy your sanitary products, how are you going to survive? How are you going to survive? What can be done about this? How can the problem of women be, with regards to menstrual hygiene challenges be, how can life be made easier for them? We really, really need to put this in the front burners to keep screaming about it. I know there's been a campaign, a general campaign over the years for government to even remove pads on sanitary products so that people will be able to, so that the prices could be reduced, or either reduce tax or remove tax totally. In some other countries, government is already giving it out for free. In Uganda, in Kenya, and some other countries, it's being given out free to schoolgirls. Why is it that in Nigeria, something as a gesture, a policy gesture as simple as reducing tax on sanitary products cannot be achieved? How is it that a gesture as simple as removing totally taxes on sanitary products cannot be achieved? It shows how desensitized our government is with regards to gender sensitive issues, completely desensitized. They don't feel that it's a problem. And then again, people that are directly impacted, people that are directly uprooted, people that are displaced as a result of this banditry. We have to go the extra mile to talk on their behalf, to give them a voice, to give faces, to give voices to the challenges that they go through with regards to menstrual hygiene management and period poverty in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Betty Abba. That was very insightful. And thank you very much for also raising some of the additional issues that women go through that we don't think about. Before I open up to the questions that we have in the question box, I would like to convey the apologies of one of our panelists who has been unable to join us back in this conversation. And that is Dr. Leila St. Matthew Daniel, who made it very clear from the start that she was having internet connection challenges and has been unable to make it back. Unfortunately, we will not be benefiting from what would have been a very rich presentation from her. But Dr. Leila St. Matthew Daniel is an internationally recognized personal growth and transformational expert. She's also a writer, TEDx speaker, emotions coach, executive coach, and leadership trainer with a passion to help connect people to their authentic purpose. As the chief exec of Jacinta's, a lifestyle re-engineering firm, she uses her background in business administration, psychology, behavioral science, NLP, and clarity coaching to improve the performance of organizations to impact on their return on investment. 18 years ago, she founded an NGO, Acts Generation, which is focused on advocacy for women. And to date, she has intervened in the lives of over 4,000 women in advocacy, therapy, counseling, and empowerment issues. This has also taken her into the field of the effect of internal conflict on women and at-risk children. She believes that only when a woman is emotionally, spiritually, and physically sound will she be able to take her God-given position as a healer and nurturer. So apologies that she's not been able to join us back. Straight away, I'm going to go into the question and answer session, and then we will have our discussion with whatever time is left. There are 5 questions that I can see here in the Q&A box. 2 have been answered already by the panelists. So I'm going to take the 3 remaining questions that are in the Q&A section. And I know a lot as well has gone into the chat box. I'm looking at over 100 questions and comments and conversations. And all these comments and conversations are very relevant to our discussion this evening. And it's really good, you know, for the little opportunity that I had to look at, read through some of the comments, you can see that people are very knowledgeable of what is going on. And why we are here is to find the solutions to those problems. So I have a question here from ubuntufuture.ng. And first of all, he or she says, thanks to all tonight's panelists. And the question is, how do we take correctional steps towards, quote, unsaid rules, unquote, that dictate a lot of ideologies people have towards women and females as subalterns themselves? And I will leave this question open to any one of the panelists to jump in and try and address this question. How do we take correctional steps towards unsaid rules that dictate a lot of ideologies that people have towards women and females?
Thank you very much. Let me just say a word or two here, because I've done some research and work in this area. And like I said in my presentation, one of the areas of violence and insecurity that we hardly address is the issue of culture-based violence. And that is about worldviews, ideas, ideology, and those kind of norms and values that inform them. So how do we deal with them? Well, there are good practices from countries that show that the best way is to actually challenge them and to challenge them constructively by showing the truth to the lie. How do you show the truth to the lie? Let me give you an example from just a little practice, and I mentioned this in my presentation. When we did the intervention in 2 local governments in Plateau State had never, ever had women on the traditional councils. And indeed, it was regarded as a cultural, customary taboo for women to even think about being on the traditional council. It was the sole preserve of men. And what we did was that first and foremost, we went in, we conscientized the women to understand that they could actually become change agents. And then we got the women to organize. We strengthened their capacity in peace building, negotiation, in speech delivery, in advocacy, and we helped the women to see that, oh, I can actually begin to do something. And these women began to initiate little projects in their communities. And these projects caught the attention of traditional rulers. And these women also began to empower themselves economically. So when the traditional rulers saw this, they began to invite these women, first for their opinion. And when they saw that, wow, these women have good ideas, they now say, you know what, we need these women on our councils. And they now brought these women onto their councils. So an age-long tradition, an idea about the role of women in society was shifted simply by changing the narrative and helping women to see themselves differently. What am I saying? First, get into women's head, help them to see themselves differently, because the way you see yourself is the way you will carry yourself, and the way other people will also begin to carry you and see you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I hope that answers ubuntufuture.ng's question. I will move straight away to the next question for lack of time. Sorry, did somebody say something?
Oh, no, I was just going to add that this public awareness program that she talked about is critical, and we should not take it for granted. That's how it starts, with the masses.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Thank you very much, Dr. Fatima. I want to go straight away to be able to take all 5 questions because of time. And the next question is from Cinderella Ochu. And she says, when abducted girls are rescued through government or organizational interventions, are there rehabilitation programs to deal with post-abduction trauma or associated effects, particularly girls who were abducted as girls and returned as young mothers? What happens to them and their babies? And I think this emphasizes the question that the rhetorical question I put to EA after her presentation, which has to do with not just relocation, but most importantly, the rehabilitation and reintegration of women. So I don't know if Dr. Ie wants to come in here on this question.
Definitely, thank you. Thank you for that doctoral title. I'm not a doctor actually, but
oh, sorry, my apologies. Yes. Well, you're as knowledgeable as a doctor would be. So
so thank you very much for that question. And indeed, sadly, a lot of the, so first there's the issue, someone did raise that of Stockholm syndrome, where these girls are taken in, as you said, at a very impressionable age. They were married off, possibly, and also some of them were, raped, and they actually started families in these camps. Now, some of them were chosen as wives to some of leaders in these terrorist camps. So you read accounts of some who have come out or been rescued, they go back to their communities and they're actually pariahs, and the communities ostracize them. Unfortunately, the rehabilitation programs we've heard about, for some reason, are shrouded in secrecy. When they're rescued or brought home, there's a lot of media fanfare, political fanfare. Where they're taken sometimes is not clear. We've heard stories of places where they're taken to be rehabilitated, and they are being rehabilitated in one part. You have a lot of groups coming, telling them things like, oh, forgive your captors and all that, and they don't really get the kind of psychosocial support they need. And some of them we've heard in one case where they were housed in a complex. One part of the complex actually housed so-called repentant terrorists. So imagine the horror of you've been rescued from this place and you're housed next to people who were possibly maybe even raping you while you were there, and people coming, putting pressure on you to forgive them, and so on and so forth. I actually think it's extremely irresponsible of groups, religious groups, to come and be preaching such things to victims when justice has not been done and the rehabilitative work has not been done. So unfortunately, that is shrouded. Some of those things are not clear. That's not to say they don't have programs, and some are probably good, but some of the ones we've seen are more ones that maybe have been taken care of, taken on by certain groups. So for example, you asked about the Bring Back Our Girls campaign. That is still ongoing, but of course, there's so many issues. And to be honest, we as a people have not really supported in many ways the Bring Back Our Girls campaigners, because it now became political and they were accusing them of foisting Buhari on the people and not dealing with the real issues. So the campaign is still there. They keep pushing. Even today, I got an email telling us about how many children, girls were still in captivity, and calling for more help. So that is ongoing, but there's a lot of stuff going on there. So unfortunately, a lot of these girls who come, some of them actually want to go back. And there have been stories of some of them running back into some of these terrorist arms, or wanting to go back because they feel they were better treated in those camps. That's the ones that married the leaders. They were more revered and whatever, but they come out now and they're ostracized and called, they have names for them. Some of them, they call them Boko wives and so on and so forth. So again, it's back to this cultural violence that we've put into, that the structure, the real structure of cultural violence against girls who go through violence themselves. So it's very important that as people, as women, as activists, as even women, we should start asking those questions very openly. The reason a lot is done and nothing really seems to happen is we don't ask questions, we murmur, we complain. But we got together, or we started asking those questions very vehemently of our elected officials. They wouldn't like it. You will get a lot of pushback. But in many ways, we don't. We just assume certain things. So I've had calls, for example, to call the governor of my state once and challenge him on not responding on a particular situation. He actually called me back and tried to defend his position. So if you call people and you call them out properly, and engage consistently, things can begin to happen. So maybe that's one thing that we as a movement, as a body, need to begin to take very seriously and begin to call our reps and say, what on earth is going on with these with women who are abducted? So yes, that's I hope that sort of provides some insights, but there's a lot of work to do. And I appeal, if there are people doing work in this area and you have stories to share, please put them out there so we understand more what's happening with rehabilitation of abductees who are rescued or who escape. Thank you. One last thing I'll just mention, some groups have been doing some good work. I know, for example, a missionary group called the Church of the Brethren, or called EYN, I'm sure those in the North will know them. They did quite a bit of work with some of the Chibok girls, some of them that escaped. There was a story on CNN, 2 of them were taken abroad. So, and they do these things quietly. They've been attacked a lot by Boko Haram themselves. So there's quite a lot of work going on. Maybe we need to tell the stories more to inspire more people. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, EA. Straight away, I'm going to the next question coming from Obasanjo Joseph Oyedele. And he says, what can we do to influence the law preventing a woman from taking family planning methods without the consent of their irresponsible husbands who want more children they can't care for? Is there any one of our panelists who has not contributed in answering the questions who would like to come in? Otherwise, anyone can come in on this question. I can take the question again. What can we do to influence the law preventing a woman from taking family planning methods without the consent of their irresponsible husbands who want more children they can't care for?
Can I spin that a little, if you don't mind?
Yes.
Or someone wanted to respond? I've already spoken, so if someone else wants to, please go ahead.
Well, I've spoken too, but I just want to put a little bit of perspective into this question. For us, there is no limit as to how many kids you can have. My brother has 16, and I know I've supported a whole lot of them. And when I called him, I think at the 13th child, and he's like, how dare you? Don't you understand, the culture is what God has given, and nobody questions what God has given. And if you know us, we have also the Sharia law. And this is a very sensitive question, and I'll be very careful the way I respond to it. But I have tackled those same things to some of my relatives who are just popping out kids. And I have been, reprimanded and have been put in my place. It is difficult, especially for people who think that they're educated, to really point to this. I look forward to anybody who has a better answer. But for me right now, it's more of a religious edit than anything else. Allah.
Okay, I
Thank
think
you, EA. Yes, go on.
Yeah, okay, Dr. Fatima, absolutely. It's a difficult one. But I was just I wanted to spin this on its head. And again, I'll touch a bit also on this menstrual hygiene thing. It's the same, the way something is narrated to you and the way the agenda is set in how you discuss things. So let's think about it. How come a man in his lifetime can probably have 100 children or more if he's really busy in that area? But how come even in the Western world, where they're so supposedly advanced, the child spacing or pregnancy prevention measures are always targeted at women? How come the messaging does not target men more? So I'm beginning to put out these uncomfortable questions out there. Why can't, fine, if there's the religious aspect of it, for Christians, for example, or those who are not Muslims, why don't you get a vasectomy? You're asking me to go and put in a coil or whatever, you're planning to be having children all over the place, so other women will be looking after them for you. So that's one thing. Same thing on this issue of the men pads. It's amazing how for many years, all of us were sold on this need for condoms. and free condoms were being dispensed. Remember, sex is a choice you have, but menstruation is not a choice. But how many of us were campaigning for free pads? And we all bought into this narrative, and we're busy advocating condoms all over the place. I'm not saying we should not advocate or use condoms, but as women as well, sometimes we need to step back. And when people come with this messaging, we need to also push back and say, hang on a minute. I'm menstruating. I need pads. I don't have money. But you can afford to go without sex for a few days. So why must I allow free condoms for you? And I can't have free pads. So these are some, I think sometimes we have to also turn these questions on their own heads. But in terms of changing laws, it starts with the usual. You start with a petition. You have to do a lot of the groundwork, begin to advocate, mobilize people to agitate for this. And it can take a while, but if it's that you want to change legislation, you really have to start that difficult work and keep pushing it, and just get many people on board the cause and educate people as to why it's important to change that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the responses that we've had so far point to one thing, that whilst we're looking at developing gender-sensitive policies, it is also very important for us to look at the policies, the already existing policies, and how they discriminate against women and what we need to do to change those policies, not change them, of course, to get them implemented and accounted for. So the next question is coming from an anonymous attendee who is asking, how can we demystify period in our social narrations? It is very difficult for females to openly discuss this. I totally agree with that. And I'm very grateful once again to Betty Abba for bringing that up. And I want to add to that one more area that we just feel, even as women, is really difficult for us to discuss, and that is menopause. Why is it so difficult for us? I think that is an area that we need to demystify, as well as talking, as young women talking about their periods, as middle-aged women talking about menopause and being very open about it. If I'm going, as I am at the moment, going through menopause, I should be able to say, tell people very openly the reason why I'm fanning myself in the middle of winter. So how do we demystify these discussions?
Okay, can I come in?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. And I really appreciate the fact that it's a message that's well taken. Demystification of period poverty and the issues around the challenges that a woman face with coping or grappling with.
Sorry to interrupt you, Betty, sorry. Just to remind you, can I give you just 1 minute to speak on that? Yes, because I'm and then I'll give Professor Fumi, I see her hand is up as well,
okay,
1 minute, because I'm very conscious of time. Thank you.
Straight away, I would say that is to keep talking about it. And I remember vividly what really helped in the demystification and the drastic reduction of stigma around people with HIV that are HIV positive in Nigeria is people speaking up about it and people coming up actually to speak up and say, I'm HIV positive, or people even that have suffered sexual violence to say, I'm a survivor, I'm a rape survivor. And then what we've seen over the years is that there's a reception. People just come down and say, oh, so this is actually someone that is the face of HIV, the face of a rape survivor. So I think we should, as women activists, we should ensure that it's in the front burner, and then we should talk more and more about it, and then target policy makers. But one big thing I have in my mind is for people to come up. In recent times, I've begun to talk about my challenge with fibroid and the issues of managing my period. Now, and then I compare myself to people in the village who are economically less advantaged. And then I try to put myself in their shoes, and I talk about this openly all the time. So when all of us begin to talk about it, the stigma will reduce drastically, and then government to take it up as a policy initiative to ensure that women are more comfortable, because there's little we can do with just distributing pads from time to time. Only a policy initiative will be able to really address this in a sustainable way. So let's keep talking about it. and make it, put it in the front burners, as we always say, because the media is also a very strong vehicle for campaign, for realizing campaign objectives like this.
Thank you very much. Professor Fumilayo Paramalam.
Thank you so much, Pei. Just to quickly address the two issues, because I was putting my hand up right from then. On this issue of demystifying menstruation and menopause, let me give you my own example. When I was a young girl, little girl, I was so privileged to have a mom who spoke to me very early in life about sexuality, menstruation, and all of that. And so by the time I began menstruating at the age of 13, I actually was so much looking forward to it. I was very comfortable in my own body. So what I'm saying in essence is that we mothers, parents, have a very big role to play in helping our girls to feel comfortable in their own bodies and to feel that sex is healthy, that menstruation is also healthy and a wonderful part of growing up to being a woman. And that means when people think that way, they can begin to also speak about it freely and without inhibition. Then on the issue, the first issue that you mentioned about how we change the mindset, I think that there are some country best practices that have used positive reverse psychology. In other words, they've initiated rules and regulations that made people think that they were the ones changing their cultural attitudes towards having children. So for example, child policy, or what you call population policies in China, in India, I wouldn't use China, sorry, that was even draconian, but I will use countries like Singapore, for instance, that got people to realize that if you want to be a modern family and have access to 1, 2, 3 different benefits that the government is putting up, then you probably need to limit your family size. And so people began to limit their family size simply because they wanted to gain access to certain privileges that government was putting out there. So that's a positive way of getting people to change their minds. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you very much. Miriam Ejikeme has said that she would like to add that non-prosecution of offenders of violence against women has not helped matters. And I think this is very important that we, take it on board as some of the problems or some of the challenges that we are encountering in the implementation of gender-sensitive policies. The final question for this evening, just before we go, is from, 2 more questions just before we round up. And the first one is from Dr. Oluwatoyin Oluwani, of Redeemers University, and he says, how do we ensure sexual violence against women and girls are reported without endangering their lives? And I think that is very important as well, because a lot of women and girls don't want to come forward, to admit what has happened to them because of the fear of being exposed. Just 1 minute, Betty Abba, I see your hand is up. Do you want to take on that question? Or is that a historical hand? I don't know if that's from the previous...
let me try and bring it down.
Okay, all right. Does anybody want to take on that question? Just respond to it in 1 minute, please.
I can try.
Yes.
I think we had a situation actually on our Womanifesto group where there was this, someone reported that in a situation, a college situation. And I think it's very important for the school itself to have a very clear policy about this, and to perhaps explore partnering with entities that work in this space, NGOs, to maybe have an anonymous line where people can report rape or sexual violence against them, because yes, there is a lot of stigmatization, and sometimes when people do report, they actually get even further victimized. So it's important to do that and maybe protect their identities, and they can work with they can work with those groups. I know, for example, WFM, they were doing some work in a university, I think Ife University, and there were a number of people who had been trained on that, also training people on these things. So it's a lot, it's very difficult, but if you're within a university community, I think the university authorities themselves have a lot of work to do. Maybe find also champions in the community who can work with you to educate people more on these things. But you do have to provide that safe space, maybe anonymous phone calls people can call in and be able to carry out those discrete investigations. It's difficult, but one must keep trying. Prof is also typing an answer, so I'm sure she'll also be able to weigh in.
Okay, great. I can see that 2 more questions have been added. However, because they are not policy related, I will not expect that our panelists will respond to those questions, the last 2, but I will read them out just as something for us to think about. So the last question that I'm going to ask for a response for is from Oluwa Shola Aino, who's asking, for saying, first of all, I wish we would have a way of focusing more on women orientation before looking at the larger community, because issues around gender inequality also emanates from women themselves. My question is, what can we do to bring most women to the same page of understanding? And I think this takes us back to what we've been saying about the narrative of women not being the supporters of themselves. Does anybody want to respond to this? Is this a historical hand, or you want to come in here?
No, I want to respond to that. I think I hear the questioner, but I think we need to be also realistic. Human beings are human beings, and we will, whether we like it or not, there will always be people who will oppress people, regardless of gender. On Twitter some time ago, some of these are young feminists were talking about this, and they were citing examples, like, for example, when a male politician betrays another male politician, they will say that's an example of men supporting men. Of course, they were being sarcastic. But we need to understand that these are human dynamics, and we need to keep on doing that education. Women, we're as special as we are, we still have social conditioning that makes us susceptible to oppressing others sometimes when we're in positions of power. Or, as someone said, we may not be empowered to be able to empower other women. So I would not, I think for me, the bigger issue is, how do you create a safe environment so that people are protected, women are protected, children are protected, men are protected, boys are protected, because it all ties together. And the reason we have gender-based violence is because the society itself is not safe. And sometimes even the men are perpetrating out violences they've seen their fathers doing. So it's very important that we do not, carry out witch hunts against other women and say, no, women, because women are oppressing women, therefore, no, let's address it holistically and keep educating other people. And one last thing I'll say, if we see women carrying out cultural violent practices against other women, for example, this enforcement of widowhood rights, some of the people who work in this space, what they do is get those women together and ask them, okay, why do you do this thing? A lot of the time, they don't even have a reason. They've just been conditioned to do that. Education actually plays a big role, because once you explain its effects and you help them to understand it, they begin to stop doing those things. So I think education plays a huge part. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And, just to support some of the things that have been said, about that challenge, it came across in my research into women in politics in Nigeria. I did an analysis of training, as an intervention to get more women into elective positions in Nigeria. And in doing that, I interrogated the challenges that the women that I was working with were going through. And one of the women that I spoke to, who was a sitting senator at the time, actually mentioned that lack of women supporting women as one of the challenges. So it does exist. The big question again is, how do we put the solution into policy? Some of the things for us to think about. So the 2 questions from out of the Q&A box that I would like us to go and ponder upon are, first of all, from Kende Adigbite, how can anyone tell me, if any country succeeds with an irresponsible leadership? Just something for us to think about, I would say. And the other one is, how do we deal with the issue of women oppressing women? I'm not going to ask for responses to those questions, because I as I said, they're not directly related to gender-sensitive policies, just some things for us to think about as we put solutions together. So once again, I would like to thank our panelists, very intelligent women. I have taken away so much from the discussions this evening. And there's so much to think about. Bottom line is there's so much more work to do than anything else. But what I think the most important thing that I was able to tease out of all the discussions has to do with our policies in Nigeria, gender sensitive policies. And I can't help but think about the national gender policy of Nigeria and what has happened to that policy, how that policy is being implemented, the contents of that policy and how that works for women. And at the end of the day, accountability. Who is held accountable for the lapses within the national gender policy of Nigeria? And that takes us again to the discussion that most of the panelists have agreed to this evening, which is the lack of women on the roundtables where decisions are taken. And if there are no women on those roundtables, how can gender-sensitive policies be implemented? And with that, we've got to think about political participation and political representation. I know that when it comes to the concept of political participation, there's a very large number of women very active in political participation, but they are only active as voters and active as campaigners for men who go on to take elected positions. In representation, the percentage is very, very low. And I think this is where the big work is. As I always say, and is my mantra, we've got to be the change that we want to see. We've got to be part of that change. And so we've got to be there, present ourselves in elective positions, be on those present ourselves for those roundtables where decisions are being taken. As Aisha Osori said yesterday while she was speaking in another panel, the problem is the political will as well. Do we have the political will to change the things that we want to change for women? And on that note, I think being the last panel for the conference, I would like to invite Professor Okome to say a word in closing and to say thank you to everybody involved in the entire conference. Professor Okome, over to you.
Am I ready to do that? I've been your typist. Well, you know, I really appreciate every single panelist on this panel and on the other three, and our wonderful moderators who helped us to facilitate sound discussion. I want to say on the gender thing, you know, people, I had my hand up because I wanted to respond to this issue of women not supporting women. You know, I wish we would really step back and look at whether men support men. Here, thank you so much for raising that. In situations, okay, so we have a patriarchal system. That patriarchal system does not reward people who defy it. So it structures our responses, whether we are male or female, in terms of the things we do. It rewards us or punishes us. So when people are doing the punishing of individuals, they're responding to system dynamics. And I think people miss that, and somehow, in society also, marginalized people are blamed more than those who are powerful. So this is why people overlook what men do to other men and to women and focus on women who don't have as much power in the system. So I think we all need a mind change. And, sometimes I think that we all say education is important, but the kind of education we're getting does not help us to understand the societies in which we live, our place within it, and what we need to do to change the circumstances we're in. We're not empowered. by our education. Our education is creating robots that just think a certain way. And we kind of veer a little bit out sometimes, but majority of us are education is a means of socializing and indoctrinating. So we need to change the kind of education we do. And I like the pedagogy of the oppressed kind of education, you know, that we should understand what our circumstances are. Each of us is a powerful agent of change. I don't even believe that I am going to be voice for somebody. I should clear space so that that person is able to articulate their own voice. Because a lot of people know what the problems are and what the solutions are, but we don't want to listen to them. So thank you all very much. You're going to be hearing from us because we're going to have proceedings. We're going to even publish a book on this matter. And we're going to make sure that it's published not only in the West, but also in Nigeria and Africa so that it's accessible and available. And then I thank my partner organizations. I thank African Peace Builders Network, or Peace Building, I think, of the Social Science Research Council and Dr. Cyril Obi. I thank Lagos Studies Association and Professor Sahid, the irrepressible. I thank also Nigerian Studies Association and Dr. Chika Okoye for the work that they did to put this together, to bring us all together, to facilitate our conversation. You know, so this is actually also just the beginning of a partnership among all of us to keep doing this kind of work. So watch this space. Dr. Okoye and Professor Sahid, over to you.
Okay, yeah, I think it's been a great experience since yesterday, listening to these great presentations by some of the finest intellectuals working across disciplines within the civil society and activist community. We cannot thank you all enough for your great input. It demonstrates the significance of allowing non-academics to have significant input into the kinds of things we do, both in the academic and the non-academic world. It strengthens the community, providing us with raw data about what is actually happening on the ground. Much of the information and the ideas and analysis and critical reflection that we've had since yesterday actually filtered into academic work. But unfortunately, there's limited conversation between the academic community and of course, the civil society and the activist community. And that's exactly what we've been able to do with the help of Professor Okome, the Nigerian Studies Association, the African Peace Building Network, and of course, the Lagos Studies Association. I would like to thank everyone for taking their time. It's a lot of work to stay with us for 10 hours of your life since yesterday. And of course, I would like to thank the moderators, the speakers, the audience for their participation. And of course, we look forward to the next level of conversation and the kind of life that this webinar would assume after today. Thank you.
Thank you again to all of you who've participated in this two-day webinar. Our hope is that this will be an ongoing series and that we'll continue to have this conversation because it's an important conversation. And the fact that we've been able to bring scholars and others outside of academia together is a good sign that we're trying to get things done because each side can educate the other. And if we're organized, we can get more done politically. So hopefully we'll continue to be in touch with all of you and we'll continue to develop policy solutions that make sense. If we're organized, we can get more done. So please, people, keep an eye out, watch this space. We'll be getting in touch with most of you in the very near future. Thanks again for being here.
Oh, Dr. Obi is here. So
thank you very much. Professor Okome, oh yes, Dr. Obi, over to you. I was just going to make one little request. I don't know if the panelists would like a nice screen photo for their social media. And if they do, if we can all put our cameras on.
You know, that's nice.
Over to you, Dr. Obi.
Thank you.
Dr. Chika, can you take our photo?
Well, thank you very much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our panelists, as well as the presenters. On behalf of our organizations, the APN, the LSA, the NSA, and our indefatigable Professor Okume, I really want to extend a warm, I want to extend very warm gratitude to each and every one of you. This is just the beginning. It is definitely not the end. There is a lot of work to be done. We have had a lot of things in terms of solutions, in terms of policy actions, and things that are necessary. We would have the energy. So I think we should pray for energy, and we really like the commitment that has gone into this. We have shown the world that we have distinguished Nigerian women who are capable and able, and who have the vision, and they have the experience to actually make our country a better place. And on this note, I really want to thank everyone. I want to thank Sahida Denrito. I want to thank Chika Okoye, and of course, Professor Okume. I really want to thank each and every one of you. The APN is really glad about this session in particular, because one of the goals of the program is to connect research to policy and practice. So this is really what we want to do. I'm sure our researchers have learned a lot from this, that we are not just doing research because we want to become, we want professional development and become professors and become big people, but we actually want to contribute towards bettering our society and fighting for the dignity and freedom of all our people. So thank you very much one more time. And till we meet again, we are going to have another in this series early next year, promise. And we hope to consolidate what we have done, and we'll start looking at the results. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And well done, everyone.
Yes.
Bye.
See you in Nigeria.
Dr.
Yeah.
Shah, did you take the photo?
Ah, you've taken it. Okay, good.
Okay.
Thank
Please
you.
circulate it to us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, and
Thank you
good
very
night,
much.
my
Bye, everyone.
sisters and
Bye-bye.
brothers in
Bye.
Nigeria.
Oh, have we taken?
So Professor
everybody?
Paramalam, oh, she's gone.
She's gone.
My sister, rocking the same hairdo as me.
Yes, you look fantastic. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And
Well,
for
thank
all the
you.
work you are doing, and your presence in Womanifesto.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for yours too, and all the great contributions. I was just saying that, when you made that point about the power dynamics in the patriarchal society and how the marginalized get blamed, I thought that is just so profound. It's not something we really think about,
Yeah.
But of course, we'll be talking some more. I think more people need to hear those kinds of we need to have those kinds of conversations more.
Yeah.
So we stop this idea.
Yeah, I think that all of us are not very good at really grounding what gender means. That it's not just about, oh, women are marginalized, but what are the reasons and in what ways? And, in terms of the everyday life, how does this manifest? Because I'm sick and tired of people's laziness, in also taking it away from the West and their obsessions about gender, but really looking at our society.
Yeah.
How is our society gendered? I don't think it's identical to the West at all.
No.
And then in terms of also that concept, how it's manifested in human life is so intricately intertwined with everything we do. Even the things we think, spontaneously, because we're socialized,
Yeah.
And then, I think people also don't realize how societies incentivize us to behave in particular ways.
Absolutely.
Necessarily advantageous for us, but if you want to be part of society, it's the price you pay.
Yes.
Because they will ostracize you and punish you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if we're preaching to people to be brave, who has their back?
Yeah.
Who has their back? Who's going to protect them when people come at them?
Yeah.
Because they will. And I'm saying that because in my family, when I say to a woman, go and fight, your husband, like my cousin or my person, I will be behind that woman to support her. I will fight my own person on behalf of the oppressed. But who is there? A lot of times we will just tell them, resist this one and that one. But when they're bearing the pain, we don't run.
Yeah.
Or we turn around and blame them. So there are practical nuts and bolts things and ways in which we have to understand our situation. That if we really get our people to understand, it will be transformative. Or if we ourselves understand, the way we do our work will be also, transformed. So anyway.
It's a difficult balance. It really is. Because we have to be realistic. It's not going to change very quickly. So we have to be patient.
Look at what Fatima said, which I think is really crucial. Me, I'm looking and I'm saying this person is having 20 children. It is a problem. And the person is looking at me and saying, look at this woman, only 2 children. They're pitying me. I want to go and convert somebody who pities me for being like, clueless.
Well, it's like wearing the hijab or being in purdah. People will pity you. Hey, you have to hustle every day, going outside.
And men are texting you, and
Yes.
You have to enter a bus, and everybody comes into contact with your body.
Yes.
So never mind the mansplaining. I'm in a meeting, and all these people are. You say something, and the man feels that they should they should replay it in their own words.
Oh yeah. It's so interesting.
But some good work has been done on women in Purdah. Beverly Mark's work. Beverly Mark and the other woman, Callaway.
Yes.
Yeah, that brought a lot of illumination into the fact that.
Not even that. In my own personal life, I went to school at University of Maiduguri. They were pitying me. You have to go out and hustle. Why? Why? It's suffering. And then you start to look at it differently.
Yeah. I think it's very important, like you say, to explore those different perspectives. Because Prof, like you said, we've really taken on, in many ways, a Western interpretation of what gender equality or whatever it is we want to call it means.